In the picturesque Greek town of Glika Nera, located near Athens, a tragedy occurred on May 11, 2021 that shook not only Greece, but the entire world. 20-year-old Caroline Crouch was brutally murdered in her own home, where she lived with her 33-year-old husband Babis and their 11-month-old daughter Lydia. Caroline and Babis's story began on the island of Athens, where they met in 2017. Caroline, who had moved to Greece from England at the age of 8, was then a 15-year-old schoolgirl. Babis, a successful helicopter pilot who was 12 years her senior, immediately caught the girl's attention. Despite the significant age difference, a romantic relationship developed between them. A year and a half later, Babis proposed to 17-year-old Caroline. Soon after her 18th birthday, the couple married while on vacation in Portugal. It was an atypical wedding for Greek traditions, without guests and lavish celebrations. The newlyweds settled in Athens, where Caroline studied at university and Babis continued working as a pilot. At first glance, their life seemed idyllic. The couple's social media was filled with photos of the happy couple. They appeared successful and in love. However, serious problems were hidden behind the beautiful facade. 3 months after the wedding, Caroline became pregnant, but unfortunately miscarried. This loss was a difficult ordeal for the young couple. Soon Caroline became pregnant again, and in July 2020 their daughter Lydia was born. Motherhood became the most important thing in Caroline's life. Everyone who knew her said she adored her daughter and devoted herself entirely to caring for her. However, it was during this period that serious problems in the couple's relationship began to manifest. Caroline's diary, which later became important evidence in the case, revealed the dark side of their marriage. In her entries, she described in detail how Babis became increasingly controlling and manipulative. He isolated her from friends and family, tracked her movements, and even accompanied her to therapy sessions to eavesdrop on conversations. In July 2020, when Lydia was only a month old, Caroline first told Babis she wanted to leave him. In her diary she wrote, "Today my little one is a month old. It's also the day I told Babis I want to leave. I feel so bad." She even found an apartment in central Athens for herself and her daughter. However, fear of leaving her daughter without a father and emotional dependence on Babis forced her to stay. "I love him so much that I can't leave, even if this relationship is hurting me," Caroline wrote in her diary. These words reflected the depth of her inner conflict and the complexity of the situation she found herself in. Babis, for his part, did everything possible to keep Caroline under control. According to their psychologist Eleni, he installed a program on his wife's phone to track her movements. Caroline was afraid Babis might hear their conversations during therapy sessions and constantly checked if the office door was tightly closed. Despite the problems, the couple continued to live together in their home in Glika Nera. They even planned to build a new house and purchased a plot of land for this purpose. Caroline's parents gave them €50,000 to start construction. The couple kept part of this money, about €10,000, at home, a common practice in Greece, where the banking system is not considered reliable. Outwardly, the couple's life seemed prosperous. Babis was a successful helicopter pilot, they traveled, lived in a nice house. However, the family's financial situation raised questions for investigators after the tragedy. Suspicions arose that Babis might have been involved in drug smuggling using his helicopter. This could explain their luxurious lifestyle. The tension in Caroline and Babis's relationship was growing. On May 10, 2021, according to the investigation, the couple had a big fight. Caroline again threatened to leave her husband. She even tried to book a hotel for herself and her daughter for the night but was unable to do so. On the morning of May 11, 2021 at 6 o'clock, police received an alarming call from Babis Anagnostopoulos. He reported a brutal robbery during which his wife was killed. When police arrived at the scene, they saw a shocking picture. In the bedroom on the second floor of the house lay Caroline's body. She was dead, her face pressed against a pillow. 11-month-old Lydia was lying on her body, crying and trying to wake her mother. Babis was tied to the floor, his eyes, mouth, and neck wrapped with tape. The body of the family dog, a 7-month-old husky named Roxy, was hanging on the stairs. The dog had been strangled with its own leash. The house was in disarray, drawers were pulled out, things scattered, the Monopoly box where money was kept lay empty on the floor. Babis told the police a shocking story. According to him, around 4:30 in the morning, 3 men in masks and motorcycle balaclavas broke into the house. They were armed with guns. The attackers tied up Babis, threatened to shoot the child, and demanded he give them money and valuables. "I told them where the money was so they wouldn't harm my family," Babis explained. According to him, the robbers took about 10,000 euros in cash and jewelry worth about 20,000 euros. However, despite his cooperation, one of the attackers strangled Caroline with his bare hands. Babis claimed he heard his wife begging for help but could do nothing as he was tied up. After that, he lost consciousness. When Babis came to, he managed to find his mobile phone and dialed a neighbor's number using his nose. Due to the tape on his mouth, he could only make muffled sounds, but the neighbor realized something was wrong and called the police. Babis's account of the brutal robbery shocked the public. Greek media widely covered this tragedy, and police launched a large-scale investigation. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis personally promised that the criminals would be found and punished. A reward of 300,000 euros was announced for information that would help solve the crime. Babis actively cooperated with the investigation and often communicated with the press. He described the attackers as people who spoke broken Greek with an Albanian accent. According to him, one of the robbers was tall, strongly built, with short blonde hair. The police made a composite sketch of the suspect based on this description. 3 days after the murder, Caroline's funeral was held on the island of Alonissos, where she grew up. Babis was present at the ceremony, holding little Lydia in his arms. He looked devastated and spoke about his love for his late wife. "I was happy to meet her, and even happier that she became the mother of our child." Meanwhile, the police carefully examined all possible leads. They checked video surveillance records, questioned neighbors, analyzed data from mobile phones. Special attention was paid to organized criminal groups that specialized in home robberies. A few weeks after the murder, police detained a suspect, a 36-year-old Georgian citizen named Georgi Karasishvili. He was a known criminal involved in a series of violent robberies in Athens. Karasishvili was trying to flee the country using forged documents when he was detained. However, after 4 days of interrogation, it became clear that Karasishvili had nothing to do with Caroline's murder. No evidence of his involvement was found, and he had to be released. This was a serious blow to the investigation. The investigation hit a dead end. No fingerprints or DNA traces of the attackers were found. Neighbors hadn't heard any suspicious sounds on the night of the crime. The only witness remained Babis, whose story became increasingly contradictory upon detailed analysis. Investigators began to notice inconsistencies in Babis's testimony. They couldn't find convincing evidence that criminals had entered the house through the basement window, as Babis claimed. Moreover, the window was too small for several men to crawl through, especially if one of them was tall and stocky, as Babis described. The police also noticed that although the house looked ransacked, this disorder seemed strangely neat for a violent robbery. Additionally, neighbors had only heard the dog barking, but no cries for help or a child crying. The biggest question was the lack of any biological traces of criminals in the house. This was extremely unusual for this type of crime. Even under Caroline's nails, no foreign DNA was found, although according to Babis, she had desperately fought with the attackers. Another important point was the home surveillance camera. Criminals usually take such cameras with them, but in this case, only the memory card had been removed. The data showed that the card was removed at 1:20 at night, although Babis claimed the robbers broke into the house at 4:30. Key evidence came from Caroline's fitness watch. The watch automatically recorded her pulse. According to this data, at 3:58 in the morning Caroline was asleep. At 4:05 her pulse suddenly jumped by 50%, indicating severe stress. At 4:11 Caroline's heart stopped beating. This contradicted Babis's version of the time of the attack. Analysis of Babis's phone also revealed inconsistencies. The fitness app installed on it showed that at the time when he was supposedly tied up, Babis was moving around the house. Investigators also tried to recreate how Babis could have dialed the emergency service number with his nose while being tied up and with his mouth taped. None of the officers managed to do this under such conditions. Gradually, police suspicions focused on Babis himself. They learned that on the night of the murder, Caroline had tried to book a hotel for herself and her daughter. In a message to a friend, she wrote that she was going to leave her husband. On June 17, 2021, 37 days after the murder, a memorial service for Caroline was held on the island of Athens. During the ceremony, police officers approached Babis and asked him to go with them to Athens. They said they had detained a suspect and needed Babis's help for identification. In reality, this was a pretext to bring Babis to the police station for questioning. For 8 hours, investigators presented him with evidence that refuted his version of events. Finally, Babis broke down and confessed to murdering his wife. According to Babis, on the night of May 11th, he and Caroline had an argument. Caroline said she wanted to leave him and take their daughter. This enraged Babis. He claimed that Caroline was rough with the child, throwing her into the crib. Babis said he lost control and suffocated his wife with a pillow. "I suffocated her while she was sleeping because I was afraid of her. She had a black belt in kickboxing, and I was afraid she would beat me," Babis explained to investigators. He admitted that the murder lasted about 5 minutes. After the murder, Babis panicked. He thought about disposing of the body but realized it was impossible. Then he decided to stage a robbery. He killed the dog Roxy, knowing that no one would believe he was capable of such a thing. "I killed the dog because I knew no one would believe I was capable of it, and therefore people wouldn't believe I did this," he told the police. Babis arranged things in the house to create the impression of a robbery, then tied himself up and called the police. He claimed he did this to protect his daughter and prevent her from being left without both parents. Babis's confession shocked Greece and the world. A man who had portrayed a grieving widower for a month turned out to be a cold-blooded killer. The police called Babis a first-class actor who managed to deceive not only law enforcement but also Caroline's family and the public. The Greek police chief stated that they had suspected Babis from the very beginning. When police first arrived at the crime scene, they were alarmed by Babis's coldness regarding his wife's death. One of the officers even took the child away from him, sensing something was wrong. However, these suspicions were kept secret so Babis wouldn't flee. Investigators noted that Babis turned out to be a surprisingly intelligent criminal. He masterfully manipulated public opinion, blaming the crime on foreigners. This led to society's attention focusing on searching for a non-existent gang rather than investigating the murder itself. Babis actively communicated with the press, gave interviews, and appeared devastated on camera. He even continued to post photos with Caroline on social media, captioning them "Together Forever." This behavior convinced many of his innocence. Caroline's mother, Susan, later confessed that she never suspected her son-in-law for a second. She placed all her hopes on Babis and was filled with anger upon learning of his confession. The word "wife" was quickly removed from Caroline's marble tombstone, leaving only the inscription, "Our beloved daughter and mother." Babis was charged with premeditated murder. In addition, he was accused of obstructing justice, giving false testimony, and animal cruelty. Public opinion was so hostile towards Babis that during his delivery to court, he was dressed in a bulletproof vest and surrounded by armed police officers. Babis was called the most disgusting person in Greece, although there were those who supported him. A small group of middle-aged women gathered near the court to support him. One of them told journalists, "I in no way justify what he did, but he is quite handsome and charming." Another confessed, "I often think about him. I collected his photos and hung them on the wall in my bedroom." In court, prosecutors detailed Babis's actions before and after Caroline's murder. They argued that his every action, from removing the memory card from the surveillance camera to carefully staging the crime scene, indicated a person who acted calmly and with premeditated intent. The fact that Babis attacked Caroline while she was sleeping, according to prosecutors, demonstrated the cold-bloodedness and deliberate nature of the crime. In his testimony, which lasted all day, Babis said, "I ruined my life, I ruined my family's life. I wish I could go back in time." He called his marriage to Caroline a fairy tale and claimed that her happiness was his top priority. According to Babis, after the child's birth, Caroline became capricious and prone to emotional outbursts. This, he claimed, led to the tragedy. Babis described the night of the murder in detail, maintaining an impassive expression throughout. He acknowledged his responsibility for Caroline's death but denied that it was premeditated murder. Instead, he insisted it was a crime committed in a state of passion. In May 2022, after a month-long trial, the jury unanimously found Babis guilty on all counts. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment. Prison life proved difficult for Babis. He expressed fear for his life after being beaten by inmates of the nationalities he had tried to blame for his crime. Caroline Crouch's murder was one of 17 deaths of women at the hands of their romantic partners in Greece in 2021. In almost every case, the victim had tried to leave the relationship before her death. Such killings fall under the definition of femicide, the murder of women or girls because of their gender. In nearly 40% of femicide cases, the perpetrator is the victim's husband or partner. Caroline's tragedy forced Greek society to openly discuss domestic violence issues that were often previously hushed up. Victims like Caroline suffered in silence, lacking proper support. A journalist who participated in the documentary, Caroline, The Murder That Fooled the World, noted, "The only positive thing that came out of this case was that the term femicide was introduced into Greek media." This case, unfortunately, gave Greek society the opportunity to realize how deep this problem is. Domestic violence expert Dr. Rema Katz commented on Babis's attempts to tarnish Caroline's character after her death. This attempt to disgrace her character and make people think badly of her is, of course, an attempt to gain more sympathy and more lenient treatment, which completely contradicts his claims of remorse or repentance for what he did. Regarding Babis's claims about Caroline's aggressive behavior, Dr. Katz explained, "We often see victims arguing back in response, and we see victims even physically fighting back against coercive control. And sometimes we think, oh, they can't be a real victim. They're fighting back." Babis might have created the impression that she wasn't a real victim because she fought back, but in my opinion, she really was a victim. Caroline's death left a deep mark on many people's lives. Her parents, David and Susan, received full custody of little Lydia. Babis's parents were denied joint custody but were granted the right to visit the child 5 days a month. According to reports, despite everything that happened, Caroline's parents maintained cordial relations with Babis's parents for Lydia's well-being. Caroline Crouch still had many plans and dreams that were tragically cut short. Her daughter Lydia is now growing up in her late mother's childhood home on the island of Alonissos. David, Caroline's father, said, "Lydia is doing well, and like her mother, she becomes more beautiful every day. She's already walking confidently, eating well, and charming everyone she interacts with." The case of Caroline Crouch became a turning point for Greek society in its attitude towards domestic violence and femicide. It forced many to rethink their views on these issues and prompted action at the legislative level. One of the experts commenting on this case expressed hope, "I hope this case will live long in the memory of Greek society because it will remind us, firstly, of many misconceptions we have about people. And it will also remind us how much attention we should pay to the problem of domestic violence." Caroline's tragedy highlighted the importance of early detection of signs of violence in relationships. Experts emphasize that controlling behavior, isolation from friends and family, and financial control can all be early warning signs of potentially dangerous relationships. Caroline's story also drew attention to the issue of large age gaps in romantic relationships, especially when one partner is still a minor. The fact that Babis began a relationship with Caroline when she was only 15 and he was 27 raised many questions about the ethics and potential vulnerability of younger partners in such relationships. The case also raised questions about the role of social media in creating the illusion of a perfect life. Babis and Caroline's Instagram photos created an image of a happy couple, hiding the dark reality of their relationship. This served as a reminder of the importance of critically evaluating what people show on social media. Babis's behavior after the murder, his public appearances, interviews, social media posts, became a subject of study for psychologists and criminologists. His ability to lie convincingly for an extended period sparked discussions about the nature of psychopathy and the need for a more thorough approach to investigating similar crimes. The investigation into Caroline's murder also revealed shortcomings in law enforcement work. The initial fixation on searching for a non-existent gang of foreign criminals showed how biases and stereotypes can hinder effective investigation. This led to a reassessment of police methods and the need for a more objective approach to investigating domestic violence. Caroline Crouch's tragic fate forced many to think about how society can better protect women who find themselves in dangerous relationships. Various initiatives were proposed, from strengthening legislation on domestic violence to creating more effective support systems for victims. This story also underscored the importance of fostering healthy relationships from an early age. Schools in Greece began to pay more attention to topics of gender equality, respect, and nonviolent communication. Friends and acquaintances remembered Caroline as a cheerful, kind, and strong personality. She loved animals, enjoyed diving, and had a black belt in kickboxing. Her life was full of plans and dreams that were tragically cut short. The last video Caroline posted on Instagram shows her on the beach near her home, joyfully lifting her daughter Lydia and kissing her on the cheek. It's a touching reminder of a mother's love for her child and a life that was prematurely ended. The case of Caroline Crouch left a deep mark on Greek society and raised many questions about the nature of violence, deception, and justice. It became a symbol of the fight against domestic violence and a reminder of the importance of protecting vulnerable members of society. Babis Anagnostopoulos, despite his confession, continued to try to manipulate public opinion even during the trial. He attempted to present himself as a loving father who acted impulsively under the influence of strong emotions. However, the evidence presented in court clearly pointed to a premeditated murder. Prosecutors meticulously broke down each of Babis's steps on the night of the murder and afterward. They showed how he methodically prepared for the crime, turning off surveillance cameras, how carefully he staged the robbery, and how coldly he lied to the police, family, and media for weeks after the murder. The court also heard testimony from psychologists who analyzed Babis's personality. They noted his narcissistic traits and lack of empathy, which allowed him to maintain the deception for so long. This sparked discussions about the nature of evil and some people's ability to hide their true selves behind a mask of normalcy. The court's verdict, life imprisonment, was perceived by the public as a just punishment for the brutal crime. However, for many, it did not bring a complete sense of closure. Many questions remained about how this tragedy could have been prevented. Caroline's parents, David and Susan, faced the difficult task of raising their granddaughter, knowing she would never meet her mother. They dedicated themselves to keeping Caroline's memory alive for Lydia, telling her about her brave and loving mom. Caroline Crouch's story became the subject of numerous documentaries, books, and articles. Journalists and researchers tried to understand how a young, seemingly happy couple could hide such a dark reality. This led to broader discussions about the nature of modern relationships and how society can better support young people in building healthy partnerships. The Greek government, under public pressure, initiated a series of legislative changes aimed at strengthening protection for victims of domestic violence. Punishments for such crimes were increased, police powers to intervene in potentially dangerous situations were expanded, and funding for shelters and support programs for violence victims was increased. New educational programs aimed at fostering respect, equality, and nonviolent communication were implemented in schools across Greece. These initiatives were designed to prevent the formation of toxic relationships from an early age. The last video Caroline posted on Instagram shows her on the beach near her home, joyfully lifting her daughter Lydia and kissing her on the cheek. This touching reminder of a mother's love for her child and a life prematurely cut short remains a symbol of what was lost and a reminder of the need to fight domestic violence so that similar tragedies do not recur in the future. Caroline Crouch's life, though tragically short, left a profound impact. Her story continues to inspire people to fight for justice, protect the vulnerable, and create a society free from violence. In the memory of those who knew her, and those who learned about her after her death, Caroline remains a symbol of strength, love, and hope for a better future.